The Y originally formed in 1844 in England by a gentleman named George Williams. It was a group of him and 11 of his friends that came together to support one another with the vices of London. And then from there, Bible studies and outreach program began in 1851. It came to Springfield, Mass. And 6 years later, it appeared here on the Eastern Shore in Talbot County. And originally started out of the old church that's no longer there where the Safeway is located, that is now abandoned as well. But the YMCA provided a periodical and reading room, so there wasn't a Talbot County Free Library at the time, and so that periodical room provided access for individuals in town that didn't have access to be able to access periodicals and books. And then they began a lecture series, and of course that all predated the Civil War. And the Y as a movement was very involved during the Civil War. We don't have any history here on the shore related to that, but collectively, YMCA are called secretaries. YMCA secretaries were on the battlefield supporting the wounded and that. Post-Civil War, what we do know is the YMCA was involved here in Talbot County with programming for teens and dances, and did that all the way through the early 1900s. And then there's a window of time between around 1913 where minor league baseball is coming to the Eastern Shore, and a lot of resources are going to that. And the YMCA actually runs an article in the Star-Democrat at the time, which was called something different at that particular point, that they were going to go out of business unless they could come up with enough money to continue to operate, which I think was around $4 or something like that. And then the YMCA survives that. Interestingly enough, at that same period of time in Salisbury, Maryland, the 41st governor of the state of Maryland, Governor Jackson, Elihu Jackson, and his wife, and she is really the catalyst, begin working towards building the first real YMCA on the Eastern Shore. And they provide a parcel of land, and she secures the funds and donates the money to build the first YMCA on the shore. And it was handed over to the YMCA in 1920. And then, of course, 8 years later, that YMCA no longer exists, and now that building is still a beautiful building, Art Deco building that stands today and is part of a church. Here, the YMCA has a presence in St. Michael's on St. Mary's Square, and then still in the church there on Washington Street, and still very involved in youth programming and serving adults as well at it. So there are many people still running around that went to that Y, in the 50s and 60s when it was there. The building that we know here in town is constructed in 1967, and at the time is on the outskirts of town. So you have the church that's beside us in the Y, and if you look at the overhead picture, kind of the aerial photo, there's not a lot around the Y at the time. Of course, there were 3 churches, Methodist churches, and they all merged together. I had a relationship with the church. The 3 merged together to build the current one. And then Miss Jones, Nettie Jones, owned that church and provided a space for the YMCA. But my connection to her is directly through the stories that Ken Barton was kind enough to share. She obviously donated the money to build the golf course here in the community. Ken told me she put 30 plus kids through college in the community, including one of his. From all the stories I've heard, she was an incredible leader and motivator. She liked things to get done, and she inspired people. And there's so many that have come after her in that same mold. There's Maggie Faree, who's since passed away. If you go into the hospital, you see her name in the emergency room. Maggie Faree, cut from the same cloth, just compassionate and wanted to see our community make a bigger difference. Shirley Gooch, who's was just an incredible community leader for us, and I not only love the YMCA, but other not-for-profits. And then you have, Maxine Millar and Betty Kinsey and Delia Denny, and a whole laundry list of folks that are some of the strongest leaders you would ever find, and uniquely in this community, female leaders who really shepherded so many projects and efforts to make our community what it is today. When you think back to all those volunteers and folks that really dedicated their time and effort to make a difference in this community, you've got generation after generation that the Y has been a conduit and a vehicle to make a difference. And so here we are today, 165 years later, and still plugging away at it. A dedicated group of volunteers and staff of over 800 people working across the eastern shore of Maryland and Virginia. And we celebrated the opening of the Kent County Y back in January of this year, and I think there's about 5,000 people in Chestertown and maybe 19 in the county, and the Y has 6,000 members there. The Y in Centerville is currently under construction, which has been a passion project for us, 16 years in the making. So that YMCA will open in 2023, in the fall of 2023, and also will be a senior center, just like our model in St. Michael's. Bob Perkins, who was a friend and mentor of mine, he always said, he loved the Quaker or the Shaker saying, to do the most good for the most people in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, and all the times you can. And so that's really our mantra, and whenever we're called to make an impact, to make sure we're prepared and ready to work as hard as we can at doing that.